Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chris Macpherson Show, your home of black and white opinion on sport. No greys here. Looking forward to digging into another massive episode. Lots to pick apart. We're going to talk some golf. We're going to talk some rugby union. We're going to have Lachie Avil on to pick apart the round ball action and soccer. We're going to see Paul Dennett from Dennett on Cricket, his new podcast, talking about the Champions Trophy. Have a little cameo from Chrisian Montegan as well as we talk about the Jannik Sinner dramas and mess that has tennis engulfed at the moment. Of course, if you want to stay up to date with everything that we're talking sport throughout the week and not just our weekly episodes, you can catch us across social media on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok as well. You can find us across all those platforms and X. The Chris Mac Show is the handle to find us. And, of course, YouTube, which is our main home for our episodes each week. You can find it at the Chris Macpherson Show. Make sure to like and subscribe the video and hit the bell down below so that you get updates each time we go live with our shows. And we're now on Spotify as well. Each week, the podcast will go up there in an audio format for you to tune in on your travels. So make sure to get around it there and give it a share to anyone who might be a sports fan and might want some more coverage in their sporting life. But as we've been doing each week for the last few, we're going to kick it off before we bring some guests in with a little bit of a Maccas Musing and what's been grinding my gears this week. And it is the NRL Indigenous and Maori All-Stars game. And while it's a wonderful piece of cultural significance and recognition, this game used to mean something special. It wasn't just an exhibition match. It was, as I said, a showcase of culture, of history, of pride. It's about the best Indigenous and Maori players going head-to-head, representing their people, representing their cultures, but with passion and purpose. In recent years, it feels like the game is slipping away. Why is that, you might ask? Well, the short answer is the biggest names in the game are pulling out. They're choosing to rest up for the season, and understandably so. That's where their money comes from. They're picking to do that rather than play in what was once a marquee event. And look, I get it. The NRL clubs invest millions in their players, and the season is brutal. It's long. No one wants to risk injury heading into round one as we head towards the representative campaigns, their club seasons, and everything that comes with that. But when key Indigenous stars and Maori stars are sitting out, it dilutes the essence of what the game is all about. This year alone, we've seen names like Josh Adokar, Nico Hines, Cody Walker opting out, leaving the Indigenous side without some of its biggest attacking weapons. Their absence isn't just about talent. It's about leadership. These are the players that young Indigenous and Maori kids look up to. When they're missing, the game loses part of its purpose. On the positive, though, we did see Kalen Ponga making his return for the Maori side, which is great to see. But it raises the question, why are some players prioritising this game while others are not? Maori coach Adam Blair has called out the NRL. He says that clubs are putting pressures on players to sit out, and you understand why. They're paying them the big bucks. They're making the long-term investments in these players. But that is a real issue here because it's impacting the validity and the underlying essence of what this game is about. The one thing that we know is if we want this game to remain special, the NRL needs to step in and they need to do it now. Maybe it's about scheduling at a better time. I'm not sure. Maybe it's giving clubs more incentive to release their players and even making it a sanctioned representative fixture so it carries some real weight. Because right now, with so many stars missing, we have to ask, what's the point if the best players are not available? NRL, the ball's in your court. We need to make sure we're supporting the clubs. We're protecting the players as much as we can, but we're giving the fans and the culture what it deserves on this great stage. That's it from me. The ball sits firmly with the NRL. Fans, we need to talk with our feet. We need to talk with our voices. Be hitting those NRL representatives up. Drop it through social media. Tell the NRL what we want to see for this in the future years. Now time to head around the grounds, and there's plenty happening across the sporting landscape. But the biggest story at the moment, again, as it is when it pops its head, is drugs in sport. And Jannik Sinner has found himself in the headlines after he has come to an agreement with WADA in a peculiar situation to accept a 3-month ban, which conveniently sits between 2 Grand Slams, meaning he won't miss a major tournament. He'll actually come back just in time to play in Italy at home. And it's going to be a peculiar one to pick apart. I am going to be joined around the grounds by Mr. Consistent, Lachie Avil from Round Ball Australia, and Chrisian Montegan from the First Serve / Round Ball Australia. Chrisian, I might go to you first. Can you unpack how and why this has happened and explain favourable treatment for the world number one?
Do you have half an hour for me to explain it? Because honestly, there's so much going on. But yeah, to give a bit of a rundown. So the initial hearing was supposed to be in April. So that's why it came as such a shock that this news broke, that they agreed on a 3-month ban. And the word being thrown around is convenient, right? Because he doesn't miss any of the Grand Slams this year. He's going to be back in time for the Rome Masters. I think it's around May 7th, and his ban ends, I think, May the 4th. So convenient is the word, because what is the real punishment? I think if a ban was to be in place, that is the perfect time for Sinner. Yes, he misses a couple of Masters 1000s in North American swing, Indian Wells and Miami. But besides that, I mean, he's only losing 1,600 ranking points. He still likely will be world number one by the time he returns. And by then, it'll basically be same old. He'll be the one to beat once the French Open and Wimbledon come around. So I think it's the fairness and the transparency that really has people up in arms, right? I don't think, look, you'd be very brave to call Sinner a cheat, right? Because WADA have come out and said that they've admitted that he's innocent in terms of he didn't know anything about it, but at the same time, he is responsible for what he does put in his body, right? Despite, the physio and the massage and all of this stuff, he's still responsible. We can all agree on that. So I think if a 1 to 3 month ban, for example, was given as soon as it happened last March at Indian Wells, when this all sort of happened, but instead there was no honesty. It was kept in the dark for about 5-6 months. Then it came out before the US Open last year, thinking, oh, hold on, this has all been happening and no one knows about it. So that's where you got players like Simona Halep, for example, who got an initial 4-year ban for also taking a banned substance accidentally. And then it got reduced to 9 months. But then it was too late. She already missed 18 months and she's already just recently retired, and it basically ruined her career. So that's where, it's all a bit messy.
It's a really interesting spot lock when we have a look at the fact that, the WADA provisions generally talk about a 12-month ban being their minimum sentence. It almost feels like the WADA lawyers kind of realised that they might have been on the ropes, and this was a way for them to save a little bit of face in terms of getting an agreement to vicarious liability, essentially, for Jannik Sinner, which is what they're essentially saying, to Christian's point, that he's not guilty, but he is responsible for the actions of his team, which is what he's saying is the piece. And, obviously it was a very low reading, but we don't know, was he on the runoff from it? All those sorts of things. There's a lot of questions that go into it. But, it just feels to me like there's some more to it. I think there was some terming around the offer, around it being offered to them, the 3-month ban.
Yeah, it screams dodgy. I won't speak to it with the same level of expertise that Christian can, but just on the face of it, and this is probably going to be the view of most regular sports fans around the world, really, is that it seems like preferential treatment. That's what it seems like. The world number one has been charged with doping. Obviously, yes, I accept Christian, as you say, like WADA said, he didn't know anything about it, but plenty of people have gone through this process under the same determination that you are responsible for what your people give you. That's just the rule. That's just the way it is. And for him to get such a significantly lower sentence than many others doesn't look good on the face of it.
No, it certainly doesn't. Christian, does it put an asterisk now over any other situations that we have arise in the imminent future? Do you think that it means that they'll be handled differently, or are we going to see more of the same where those with, deeper pockets and more reach in terms of financial situation in terms of tennis players, and I'm not going to blame them because if we're in the same situation, I'm sure we're the same. But does it make it murky moving forward for tennis?
Look, if anything, I think it helps, right? Because there's more awareness spread, and I think change will happen. I'm not saying that it'll happen soon, but I think with the PTPA, Novak Djokovic, the Players Tennis Association, he co-founded that a few years ago. So the players all come together, basically a union, essentially, to express, to the ATP and the WTA, the ITF of their, disagreements and how they can move forward with it. So they'll be looking at this case of Sinner and saying, look, how can we break this down and make it more fair? So a player ranked 200 in the world, for example, can get this same sort of treatment as Sinner's getting. Can we get to an agreement where if it's an accidental case, can it be just 1 to 3 month ban, whatever the case may be, as opposed to making the case linger and linger. And let's remember, Max Purcell got banned as well. He's still in a provisional suspension, and that was back in December. We still don't know what's happening there. So it's a different cases. I agree with Lachie. It's different rules for different players. And Sinner, world number one, yes, it is a bad image for the sport, but it's how deep your pockets are, right? Like, it's not Sinner's fault that he's got the finances to go out and get the best lawyers, Sinner's just doing what any other player would do in his position. And it's up to the governing bodies to put rules and stamp their authority in place to say, this is the way forward if future cases arise, which I'm sure will happen. It's just about how do they handle it.
I think to wrap it, Lachie, transparency, a little bit of understanding, and maybe if the Players Association can get themselves together and maybe those that are a little bit wealthier throw in a bit of a socialist pot so that it's a community for everyone. I see you bat your eyelids at that name.
Yeah.
There is some equity, and again, there's only going to be so much breach, but maybe, the top 500, the top 1,000 can contribute something, on a ranging scale, and that might create a bit of a solution. But outside of that, I don't know that there's a perfect world for it.
Yeah, no, there's never going to be a perfect world. I do agree with Chrisian, though, that the responsibility is on the people that make the rules, that you don't get the situations where someone with vastly different financial resources is somehow able to get to a different result. The rules need to be in place so that doesn't happen. And that's a whole intense level of technicality and resource expenditure you have to go into to get it to that place. But that's what's required if you really want a fair and even sporting landscape.
Yeah, I agree. A sporting landscape that is thriving at the moment, however, as we transition, is LIV Golf. They've just announced after a successful Adelaide tournament that was taken out by Jacqueline at Neiman that they will be extending the contract in Adelaide till 2031. Absolute scenes across the 3 days of LIV Golf. It's capturing the Australian public. It didn't hurt that on the morning of the first day, someone drained a hole in one on drinking a hole that got people off to a flying start. But Lachie, this has got to be a good thing for golf and how it's viewed, especially in a, as we would probably reference, a laconic Australian society. We're a pretty laid-back group, and I think this is seeing more and more, especially the younger generation, engage with golf.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what, to be honest, LIV Golf is doing a fair bit more than you could argue the PGA Tour at the moment. I turned on early Friday afternoon watching the few holes, and all of a sudden Patrick Reed made the hole in one on the watering hole, as you say, and the crowd's going crazy. It's won a number of awards in terms of like best atmosphere for golf tournaments and stuff like that, which is quite easy to see where that comes from. And yeah, massive for the South Australian government to secure LIV Golf, I believe, until 2028 at the Grange, and then there's a condition in the contract that they're going to build a new golf facility, a public golf facility, and if that clause in the contract is met, then they get it to 2031 as well. So there are a lot of people that thought LIV Golf might not exist this year, let alone in 2031, but it seems that these plans are now being laid for that far in the future, which is a whole different kettle of fish. But yeah, massive. Adelaide and South Australia, probably going back before the last 3 years when Gather Round came to town, were really struggling for major sporting events, and all of a sudden they have Gather Round, they have the LIV Golf here, and another number of other ticket items on the cards as well. So it's really turning into a hotbed for exciting Australian sporting tournaments.
Chrisian, to that point, Melbourne certainly had the upper hand in recent announcements of big sporting events. But Lockie's point, Adelaide and South Australia has come a long way from a state that pinnacle event, probably going back to pre-cut to a down under, and then before that, the Australian Grand Prix back in the early 90s. So great to see Australia. I don't think you can ever have too many top tier sporting events come into our country.
Look, as long as the Australian Open tennis doesn't go to Adelaide, then I'm all happy. I don't care. But no, it's great to see a bit more diversity. And we see with Perth as well, they're getting a lot of major sporting events as well over there. Optus Stadium, obviously brand new facility. So sharing it around, it doesn't hurt, does it? You don't want to see the same old Sydney and Melbourne. Yes, they're the two biggest cities in the country, and they're most likely going to be getting the biggest sporting events when they do arise. But to see it shared around with Perth and Adelaide and the growth in South Australia with this LIV Golf as well, I think it's terrific. So hopefully it keeps up.
Certainly is terrific. Something else that's terrific and has me wondering, Lachie, if I'm in an alternate universe. The Super Rugby competition got underway on the weekend, and we had 3 of the now 4 Australian teams. Melbourne's had their team collapsed and disbanded and sent around the country to go and pay their penance everywhere else. 3 of the 4 Australian teams were in action, and they all won. Like, if I missed a changing of the guard here, New Zealand all of a sudden not understand rugby union? Can we just say that?
Yeah, well, by the barest of margins, it must be said. Like, I'm not a huge fan of.
Let's remember the quote from the great philosopher Dominic Toretto: "It doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile."
Yeah, you get the points on the table for sure. Like, I'm not even a massive fan of Super Rugby, but to see the Western Force come back in the way they did and win that game by 1 point, was like 45-44 or something. Absolutely crazy. Yeah, Australian rugby hasn't really had a great time the last 4 or 5 years, but suddenly we kick off Super Rugby and every team is winning. So I guess that goes to show you the variability in sport.
It's always good to get a win over our Kiwi brethren, and Kiwi and Pacific Island brethren in this case. But again, it's nice when they're at the death, 2 of the games by 1 point on full time, basically, both Western Force and New South Wales Waratahs. So nice to have some bragging rights. I don't know how long it'll last, but I think we should hang on to it while we can.
Yeah, it's always good getting one over the Kiwis for sure.
Love that Trans-Tasman rivalry. Something that is not a Trans-Tasman rivalry, but is just dominant. Gout, we talked about him before Christmas, and he's broken the Olympic champion Noah Lyle's record. He is just absolutely laying it down, the 17-year-old sensation. And how good is this seeing an Australian mixing it on the world sprinting stage, Lachie?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. We talked about him at length, end of last year when he broke that national record in the 200 metres, right? And he's gone from strength to strength. It's kind of just crazy that he's doing what he is at 17 years of age. And to already say that, you're looking at the fastest man alive according to the last Olympic Games, and you're saying, yeah, I've beaten one of his records. Well, then by the laws of deduction, right, that leads you to some interesting conclusions. So he's clearly got a big future ahead of him, and it's good to see him pushing on.
He's obviously taken some learnings, Chrisian, from his time that he spent with Noah Lyles, and to beat, obviously we saw him beat Peter Norman's 200-metre Australian record before Christmas. He's now run the 400 in a faster time than Lyles. It's all trending in the right direction, and as we talked about, he's still going to be eligible over the next couple of years to compete in the under-20s World Championships as well as the Senior World Championships. Whether he will go back to the under-20s and try and avenge his silver medal from last year is another question, but the sky's almost the limit, you feel, and it's just a really good feel-good story for him.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Shevington said that he's destined for greatness, and I think everyone echoes that sentiment, because only, 16 years of age, the way he's just burst onto the scene, just basically out of nowhere a few months ago, no one knew his name, and then to come out of the blocks and really make a name for himself. He's just an incredible athlete. You lose the words to describe him. Hopefully he does, really win gold medals. You don't want to put too much pressure on him, but Olympic Games really represent Australia well, and it's really entertaining, because at least we have another Australian product in the sprinting, which we've really lacked basically forever, essentially. The 100 meters, 200, whatever it may be. So hopefully his career progresses. There's no stumbling blocks along the way, and to have someone like Noah Lyles in his corner, he can only go from strength to strength from there, really. So to learn off someone like that is pretty good. So hopefully, the trajectory is only upwards for him.
Yeah, we will certainly watch what comes for Gout. The good thing, Lachie, one of the most underrated sporting events in Australia, the Stall Gift, will be his next big target in April. So hopefully that'll bring some attention to a classic Aussie sporting event that's well and truly stood the test of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you got someone with his profile, right, he's bound to bring attention wherever he goes. So I guess that's a benefit of being an elite young sportsman in the age of social media.
Certainly is. The last thing I want to wrap with, boys, I don't know how much of it you caught, the NBA All-Star. Well, it's not a game anymore. It's a convention. It's a conference. It's a few days of activity. But the dunk contest was the piece that really caught my eye, and we have a multiple-time winner. He just continues putting it up and really breaks the stereotype that I can't think what the movie was, but back in the 90s, that white men can't jump, Lachie.
Yeah, he did all right as well, didn't he? He had the going over the car, the touch to the rim as well to go in. It's quite insane, really. And he's not even that tall, is he? He's like 6'3", 6'4" or something. Like in the realms of basketball players, he's not the tallest guy. And he went for the three-peat right in the dunk contest. So pretty special.
Yeah, it was great to see him. He came up against one of the rising stars, MVP Stephen Castle. Well, there was plenty of controversy as well. We saw Victor Wembanyama and Chris Paul actually qualified from one of the events as well. So the All-Stars, there's some questions over how legitimate it is, but it's a great piece of entertainment. I know Brody's not here to defend this, but it's a bit like boxing versus prize fighting, celebrity style. This is a bit of entertainment, right, Lachie? It's one of those pieces. It's just good viewing and gives the players a bit of a breather from regular season full, wall-to-wall basketball action.
Yeah, I actually loved what Wembanyama was doing, right? If you hadn't seen it, there was clearly some kind of points versus time set up on this skills challenge. And so they just decided, instead of shooting their 3-pointers and taking the time to set themselves for every shot, they were just going to throw the balls out and make sure their time was as low as possible. If that's within the rules, then I reckon that's just fun gameplay. I reckon they've done well.
Tactics over execution, Christian. At the end of the day, it's play within the realms of the rules. And, it's smart, but didn't get away with it.
To be fair, I would have done the exact same thing. You guys know that I'll do anything to bend the rules. And yeah, you can't blame it really. But I want to go back to the All-Star game because, yes, you mentioned entertainment, but at the same time, you want to see that effort. And I think the effort was there to a degree compared to previous years. That's been the biggest criticism. And that's why the format was actually changed in the first place. So at least that effort was there. But I think, the overall opinion from just the general fans is that it doesn't quite fit the billing as the past years. When Kobe Bryant was there, for example, that mentality he brought to the court, they wanted to try. But we live in this era where, it's very injury focused, as in, you don't want to, you want to keep resting your body, managing your minutes, and there's just no defense. Every year it's just, go up to one court score, go up to the other end score. There's just, and you get that to an extent, but at the same time, you want to see that effort, and hopefully, they can find different ways to incorporate that.
To the point that I kicked off the show with a little bit earlier before you gents joined me, it had a few more big names than the NRL All-Stars on the weekend. It's certainly better than AFLX, and, for the time being, NY players don't want to... As always, gents, thank you, Chrisian. Lachie, we might give you a bit of a spell and catch back up with you for a little bit of football action later on.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers, Chris.
We've been round the ground. It's now time to head down to the cricket nets, and we're going to welcome back our regular cricket correspondent, Paul Dennett, from the newly launched and coming to you on Sunday this week, I believe, Paul, Dennett on Cricket podcast.
G'day, Chris. Yes, very excited. It's going to be after the first game of the Champions Trophy. Probably a pretty stupid time to launch a cricket podcast, just as the cricket season diminishes completely and the nation focuses on football, but that's that's what I'm doing.
Cricket never sleeps, Paul. We know this, especially if you're going to be up watching the Champions Trophy, which we'll get to in a moment. I want to start things off. In the lead-in, we played against Sri Lanka. They obviously haven't qualified for the Champions Trophy. It was questioned as to how seriously they would take the two games. But it looks like they took it much more seriously than we did, or were just much more capable than we were, which begs the question why they aren't in the Champions Trophy, but we know those reasons. Is it troubling signs for Australia, or is it just they were just getting a few things out of the system?
Well, I mean, I watched both games, every ball of both games, and I've already forgotten that they existed, such as the nature of bilateral one-day series. I'm sure Sri Lankans haven't forgotten. It was a bit strange. Sanath Jayasuriya, after the side got humbled in the Test matches, had a broad smile on his face. I think it shows the difference in priorities that Australia put on bilateral one-days. Obviously not big in the Champions Trophy. It meant a lot. And to be fair, they absolutely thrashed Australia, especially in that second game. I think it's the fifth biggest margin of victory by runs against Australia ever, the biggest by Sri Lanka over Australia by 1 million miles. And Australia just looked completely bereft. It is a second-string side to some degree. I think the main thing is, well, that those conditions, certainly Australia took it seriously. They always take it seriously. But I think that the preparation and planning for those conditions was probably a little bit lax, and that the Sri Lankans had a blueprint of the way you do it, a little bit like old-fashioned one-day cricket, where they were just aiming for that sort of middling 250, 280 type of score, plenty of singles, and then their spinners were just far, far too good for Australia. And they do have some pretty good spinners. I mean, if they were to be in the Champions Trophy, you'd give them a chance, depending on what the pitches are going to be. So, yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a tradition for Australia, perform terribly in the lead up to a big world event and then win it. So hopefully that continues.
Well, certainly, and that probably transitions us nicely on to the major tournament. We head to Pakistan with an asterisk, and we'll get to that in a moment, for the Champions Trophy as it comes to being, it's one of the pinnacle events alongside the One-Day World Cup. We know that one-day cricket might have lost some of its lustre in recent times, but it's a very different looking Australian side. We've got no Cummins, no Hazelwood, no Marsh, JR's relief, no Mitchell Starc, and Marcus Stoinis, bizarrely in the lead-up, also announcing his retirement. It's a bit of a different-looking side for us.
Yeah, Cameron Green not available as well. And David Warner, obviously he's retired, but he's a loss from the last time Australia really took a one-day event seriously, which was the 2023 World Cup. It's going to be interesting because so often in between World Cups or big events, Australia puts all sorts of players into their one-day side. And then when it comes to the matches that really matter, Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood come back in, and it's the sort of same situation as normal. So I think they are big losses, but maybe the saving grace is going to be if the pitches are really flat and if, 300 might only be a par score. And it's a big if. I have to see how it pans out, but that's the expectation, I think. Then I think that in some ways it might be advantageous to have bowlers like Ellis and Dwarshuis and others who are kind of used to having to be crafty in difficult T20 situations. I mean, I know this is not T20, but all the varieties that they've got. You look at Cummins, he's one of the best bowlers in the world, but I think where he probably does come back to the field a little bit is on out-and-out flat decks. Last IPL I was watching quite closely, and he ended up being solid for his franchise, but no better than solid. So, if it is 300 plays 300, then maybe the loss of the big three will be felt a little bit less, but it does have a very different feel about it, this Australian side.
We'll come back to some of the other squads and some of their players missing, but I want to go back to that point, the asterisk that I mentioned before. Obviously, we're looking at the Champions Trophy. It's being hosted by Pakistan. Pakistan also the defending champions. It hasn't been played for now 2 cycles, essentially, so 8 years. 2017 was the last time it was played. We know the political tension between Pakistan and India, but India now will play all of their games in Dubai, including their game against Pakistan, and should India make it to the final will also be played in Dubai. Is this more of the BCCI? What was the quote that Brody gave us last week? You can't spell BCCI without ICC.
The Board of Cricket Control internationally. Yeah, look, I mean, leaving the politics aside, it is farcical, and no other sport would have a situation like this. It is crazy that Pakistan's hosting it, that they are going to have to go to outside their country to play India in Dubai. Not only will India play the final in Dubai, they'll play their semi-final in Dubai as well. So potentially Australia, if they were scheduled to meet India in the semi-final, would have to go to Dubai to play a semi-final, back to Pakistan if they were to win that. Whereas India get to have every single game at the same venue. It just doesn't seem right. And I'm not, I'm not an India hater by any stretch. I value the fact that if it wasn't for India, cricket, the sport that I love, would be a fairly marginal worldwide sport. It would be a sport along the lines of, I don't know what, rugby league. I didn't mean that to be a sledge. I couldn't think of another sport that would be equivalent. But so India being present gives the sport the money, it gives the sport its cachet, it gives the sport, you argue whether it's number 2 in the world it or basketball is the second biggest team sport in the world, and take India out of that evaporates. But I do think it's wrong that the situation has come to pass where India get all of those advantages, and it could backfire on them. I was remembering the last World Cup of T20 cricket that was played in Dubai, and how important it was to bowl first because of the dew that came in. So if India happen to, let's say they make the final and it's at Dubai and happen to bat first, and then when they come to bowl, the ball's slippery and it was very disadvantageous, they could have shot themselves in the foot, because they clearly are the best squad. And if this is going to be like a Premier League where we'd have 9 months of one-day cricket, you'd be pretty confident at the end of it all India would win. So anything that brings the odds back to more of a 50-50 is probably a disadvantage to them.
Well, certainly one of those pieces, though, everyone is going to have to travel to take them on, as you said, in the pool game. So you look at their pool, and Bangladesh in there with them, they've got Pakistan and New Zealand. And to put it into perspective for our Australian fans, it would be the equivalent of everyone else playing all their games in Brisbane and Sydney, while India are based in Adelaide in terms of flight time. That's kind of the distance we're talking about. It's about a 2.5-hour flight from the other venues to go to Dubai. So other teams are going to have to be flying in, flying out. There is gaps between games, but it does play into India's hands. They're going to be settled there. They know if they keep progressing, they stay in Dubai and teams come to them. So it'll certainly be interesting to see. Something that I mentioned before as well, Aussies obviously without quite a few of their pace bowlers, but 2 of the probably top-line pace bowlers for other countries in India and South Africa are both out as well. Unrik Nortje won't play. Neither will Jasprit Bumrah. So they're two big names that are going to be losses for their sides.
Yeah, and Bumrah, I think Bumrah is more of a loss than Nokia. Nokia is a fantastic bowler, but I think on really flat pitches, if that's what's rolled out in South Africa, he's not as effective, whereas Bumrah is somehow. I mean, in that IPL example that I gave where Cummins was solid, adequate, and no better, Bumrah was comfortably the best bowler in the tournament, better than all of the spinners. He was just absolutely unbelievable. So, of course, he is an enormous loss. Just back on one other point around your example, which is well said around Brisbane, Sydney and Adelaide. But the other thing as well is that Pakistan lose their home advantage for the game against India. So, whenever India play Pakistan, it's a monumental event. And if that had been held in Pakistan with sold-out stadium, hugely hostile sort of crowd, an exciting crowd, it's very different to what they're going to have playing against them in Dubai. So a disadvantage for Pakistan there.
Certainly will be. In terms of the Aussie pool, we start off up against England. The other matches up against South Africa as well will be a key clash. It'll be interesting to see. They're always a rival, and we know we'll see them in the World Test Championship shortly. And Afghanistan, coached by a former nemesis of Australia, Jonathan Trott.
Yeah, I think that it probably is the harder group to get out of. I think that England have been much maligned in the last few weeks because they've been pretty terrible. But you look at their side on paper, and they are a threat, I think, because you could argue that they've had their mind on this tournament, that they are playing with the expectation that they're going to be getting flat pitches and they're going to play accordingly. England's white ball sides in this pretty good era that they've had are very, very dangerous on flat pitches. So I wouldn't take them lightly at all. I think you can almost throw their recent form out of the window. All this talk of, they haven't been having net sessions and Bazball's gone crazy and everything else. So I think when it actually comes down to it, they'll be quite good. And I think South Africa as well. I remember just before the 2023 World Cup, Australia had that tour of South Africa, and we had a few wins early on, but then in the one days, South Africa were absolutely launching us everywhere. Heinrich Klaassen especially. I think Zampa got hit for the worst figures or equal worst figures in Australian one-day history, and they look brutal. So I think that, they are going to be difficult. And, of course, Afghanistan, we only beat them thanks to a Glenn Maxwell double century in the last World Cup of 50-over cricket, and we lost to them in the T20 World Cup. So not to be taken lightly, although maybe the conditions won't be quite as conducive to their success as previous places. Because the strange thing is that you think of Pakistan, subcontinent, therefore the spinners will be really come to the fore. But I think that the quicks tended to do actually slightly better than the spinners. So it will come down to what the pitches are like.
Certainly will. And as you touch on, South Africa are equipped with, the likes of Rabada and Ngigi. So still plenty of firepower in their pace. They've got some good spin bowlers as well. In terms of it, it's two pools of four. Top two go through to the semi-finals. Do you have a view? Does Australia make it through? I mean, we should do, obviously, on form. I think we're probably second favourites for the tournament behind India, just probably in front of the likes of England and South Africa. But it's probably quite feasible. You see a situation if we lose this first game to England that we're on the ropes early, which is not an unfamiliar situation for us.
Yeah, I mean, we've often started world events quite poorly and then caught up. And unfortunately, in the Champions Trophy, that doesn't happen because there's just the three games. Our last two campaigns in 2017 and 2013, we didn't win a game, although there's a fair few rain-affected ones there. I think that I'm reasonably optimistic. That could sound stupid because if we lose, everyone will say, well, of course you got to lose when you're going with a half strength or half the side being half strength. But I think India do deserve to be favourites for the overall tournament, partially because I think that their group, Pakistan, just don't impress me as much. They're not bad, but they don't. I don't think they have the firepower that India do. And Bangladesh, I think, are probably the eighth best of the eight. New Zealand, very, very decent. But I find it, they always have the caveat that anything can happen. But it seems hard to see India missing the semi-final. They would be deserved favourites. But I think that Australia are a threat. But England and South Africa as well, I think are pretty good. I'm tempted to say New Zealand as well. And then I think I've listed about 5 out of the 8. So that's, hedge my bets nicely.
Yeah, I think to your point, there's, Pakistan and Afghanistan, if they're at their absolute best, can completely challenge anyone, including India. But the likelihood of India getting both of those teams at their best in the pool stage, as well as, getting their back then against the wall with the travel and things with New Zealand, you have to feel that that's unlikely. So I agree that India could head through. I think in that other pool, you're looking at Australia, England, South Africa. Australia should have their nose in front, but it's a cat amongst the pigeons. Hopefully, we can. Unfortunately, we can't get South Africa in a semi-final. We'd have to wait to the final again if we're going to play them because we know how well they perform both in men's and women's cricket in the knockout stages, Paul.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Maybe Australia, India semi-final. Australia loses to South Africa in the group stage, plays India in the semi-final, wins the toss, bowls, and takes advantage of the dew, beats India, then comes back, plays South Africa in the final, and either absolutely crushes them or wins with, South Africa needing one to win with 5 wickets in hand and then lose 5 wickets or something like that. That'd be pretty cool.
Would be quite cool, as long as we don't go to countbacks and deciding things by boundaries and things like that. We don't need any more. We'll wait and see. It's certainly going to be an enthralling tournament. It will be a game down by the time we go live to air. The second game heading to Australia and England is their first game across the weekend, and it's every night in a consistent time slot. So it's just keep the toothpicks out and keep the eyelids propped open, Paul, and hopefully when we get to the business end. In a few weeks' time, we're seeing an Australian winner. I think the night of the 9th of March, if my maths is right, is when we'll see the final, either at Lahore or Dubai. Hopefully it's at Lahore because that means an increasing chance that Australia might be there and India aren't.
Yeah, and I'm not paid by them, but Amazon Prime is the host. I think you can get a free trial for the length of the tournament and then cancel it if you're especially a cricket fan and nothing else. So that is one of the other disappointments, that the fact that it's not going to be on free-to-air or even KO. It's going to go largely unnoticed in Australia, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. I think the radio will be our other option. I think ABC Sport, at least for the Aussie game, so might be cool tuning into the wireless to listen to Jim Maxwell and co. So in the meantime, I'm certainly looking forward to being very bleary-eyed for the next few weeks and having people questioning what I'm doing at work, but that's okay. It's a wonderful time to have a tournament. I know 50 over doesn't inspire a lot of people like the T20 and the Test match stuff does, but a little bit of a whetting of the appetite as we start to turn our eyes towards what will be a big clash with our pool rival South Africa when we get to the World Test Championship. So a big thank you, Paul. As we said at the start there, Dennett on cricket. It's the new podcast. It's launching on Sunday. I'm assuming based on that it's going to be covering across all the Champions Trophy as we go.
Yeah, I'll do a show after each Australian game and then after the semis and after the final. If Australia don't make the semis, I might not do a show after the semis, but I'll certainly do a show after the final.
All right, we love it. Well, that's where you can catch that. Check it out on all your good podcast platforms. And in the meantime, a big thank you to you, Paul. Good to chat cricket with you as always.
Thanks, Chris. Good on you, mate.
Well, moving on from the red ball to the football, and we welcome back after a brief spell. He was with us for Around the Grounds. Mr. Consistent, Lachie Avil. He's back again from Round Ball Australia, ready to get into the meat and potatoes of Australian football, and there's plenty to talk about, Lach.
Yes, plenty going on this week. A few surprises for sure.
Well, I'm gonna let you kick this off because I know this would have raised your attention, has raised a lot of people's attention in Australian football. But some player movement, I guess you could call it in the A-League.
Yeah, Valere, Germain, quitting was the word used in the initial report from George Clark. The A-League and Macarthur FC reads quite poorly to me. I know there was some words in there about A-League officiating standards as one of the reasons for his departure. That seems quite petulant. He was in the middle of serving a suspension for obscene actions made towards an official, so it doesn't take a genius to figure out that he's got a bit of a streak in him. He's had plenty of incidents during games with referees post-match with a lot of players. And that's something that's actually continued with Macarthur this week, despite Germain not being in the team. And all of a sudden, he's decided to terminate his contract. So it's a mutual termination with the club. Reportedly, he's had a contract offer for Japan, whose season is just starting up at the moment. So, one of the league's best players, also one of the league's biggest hotheads. And considering he's the captain of a team that's struggling a little bit at the moment, have just fallen out of the six, I think it's definitely very poor leadership. But when you can think of the world of football and how global it is, you can kind of get away with those little things here and there. So I'm sure it won't be too much skin off his back, but very disappointing for the league and for Macarthur.
Seems peculiar that after 50 games, he's now decided that the officiating in the A-leagues and Australian competitions isn't up to standard. You would have thought he would have figured that out a little earlier if that was the case. But I've also got the challenge, and you did talk about the fact that he is, one of the better players in the A-League. He'd be in that top echelon. But at the end of the day, if you're coming to a competition as a marquee player, you need to understand you're not playing in League One anymore, or League One, to Australianise it. You are going to get a level of refereeing that is befitting of the competition, realistically. And it is, realistically, when we look around the leagues around the world, it's not a top league in terms of the EPL and those sort of things. So you're not going to get the top referees. Just like if you're playing all-age F on the weekend, you're not going to get Kurt Ames refereeing your game.
Well, one of the things is, obviously, it doesn't really matter what sport or league in the world you choose to talk about. General fans will always consider the level of officiating poor. That's just a standard around the world, right? But what you'll find is that Australian officials, particularly in football in Asia, are actually quite well regarded. And Australian officials in a lot of sport seem to get opportunities at the high level, and there's a degree of personability, I think, that comes with being an Australian and the Australian culture that leads itself to good refereeing. But it doesn't really matter when you're a player. You think all the referees are bad. It doesn't really matter, right? So I think he's probably held the belief that for a little while, and then maybe there was a tipping point. We saw he went out on social media when he was watching the game and criticised the referees again. So look, this is much more a Valere Germain issue for me than it is an officiating issue.
Yeah, I think so. It really reeks of playing FIFA with your mate, and all of a sudden, there's been glitches in the controller and everything else, and then the controller goes flying across the room. I think I saw the term rage quitting with this, and that's what it reeks of. Look, at the end of the day, I don't bear the guy any ill will, but I think it's a good result for everyone if he goes and finds another home for his football. We don't need someone constantly digging away at the officials here in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, his treatment towards the officials is one thing. And then, as I said, his treatment towards the club to literally just dump them and say, nah, we're falling off a little bit. We've lost some of our good players. Jed Drew's just made his debut over in Austria. He was probably their biggest departure so far in the January window. And now Germain's gone as well. So he's left that club with the bare bones, and he's supposed to be the leader of it. So I think a very poor move.
In terms of it, you touch on where it's left MacArthur. As you said, they'd already lost one of their key attackers in Drew. Now is Germain going? Where does that leave them in terms of the season ahead?
Leaves them pretty screwed, I reckon, Chris. They've dropped out of the sixth this week after their loss to the Wanderers on Sunday. I don't see them getting back in it, to be perfectly honest with you. If they are, it's probably going to have to go down to Harry Sawyer, the former South Melbourne player that's worked his way to a professional contract. He had, I think, maybe just his second or third start of the season against the Wanderers and did a little bit, but found it tough at this level. So if they are going to do anything, it's probably going to be down to him. But to lose probably your two best players halfway through the season when you're already in a little bit of a dry spell, it was actually Valere and Jed that combined for the goal that gave them the winner in their last win against Melbourne City, right? So you take those two players out and they haven't won a game since. So I reckon they're goal difference away from the six on the ladder, but I don't see them making it come the end of the season.
You have to think it will be a struggle when you consider they have that. They've already played an extra game over everyone else as well, and they're sitting outside on goal difference. There's a couple of sides behind them that we'll get to in a moment who are in significantly better form, so you only see them trending one way. Speaking of the men's A-League, Auckland are starting to create some breathing room at the top after Adelaide dropped that result. Newcastle. Auckland, a little bit of destiny in their own hands from here. You think they've got the best goal difference, the only team in positive double figures. They're 5 points clear, not quite 2 games, but then they've got that extra game on teams like Melbourne Victory, Western United and Sydney that sort of sit in that top 6 as well.
Yeah, really impressive kind of month of football for Auckland because they were tested and, when we were sitting here at the start of the season and they were going game after game without losing, without even conceding goals, right? One thing you and I were talking about is that at some point in a football season, you're going to be tested and teams are going to come at you and, you're going to be put in scenarios where you really have to stand up for yourself. And they've had some injuries throughout their defensive line, which hasn't made things easy, but they've really stood firm. They copped a couple of losses but responded really well. So I think that's a big tick for Auckland. They went to Western out in Tarneit. That was always going to be a big game. if Western had ambitions of getting close to that premiership spot, then for me, they had to win this game. And Auckland go away. Travelling away is something they've not done as well, obviously, as playing at home. It's obviously a challenge to travel that far for an away game. But to go out to Tarangia and beat them 2-0 was really, really good. And yeah, makes them the clear favourites for me, with Adelaide slipping up as well. Even the teams in behind, the Melbourne pair of Victory and City, you can't really see any of those teams making a run as consistent as Auckland's to not just, keep up with the 5-point gap, but even close it down. So yeah, Black Knights very close to getting the early tick from me.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be far away. It's interesting, though, when we look at the other end of the table, and there's a couple of sides starting to find ways to win at the right time of year. We've seen Western Sydney have closed up that gap, but Newcastle and Central Coast undefeated in their last 5. A lot of draws in that, admittedly. Newcastle have knocked off second and third. No surprise it's come with more minutes for Kota and Lachie Rose. But those two, when we look at Newcastle particularly, 8 points in their last 4 games. Only Auckland and Melbourne Victory have got more than that. It's obviously a very small sample size, and we need to see more. And we'll undoubtedly talk about their banana skin game that'll kick off the round. But is this there's some positive glimpses, and I know I'm a biased Newcastle fan, so I might be looking into it a bit heavier than I need to. But some positive glimpses with what's happening at Newcastle, starting to at least head in the right direction. Whether they can challenge for final is a whole different story.
Yeah, finals is still a long way away for me with the Jets, but what I would say is it feels like they've deserved these 2 wins, because they've had a bit of the rub the wrong way this season. It feels like every chance that they've had to kind of generate momentum has just been kind of halted against their will. They haven't had too much control over it. And you bang on, right, with Lachie Rose coming back from injury and Kota Mizunuma coming in January. Those 2 players have made a massive difference. So I think it's kind of returning towards the mean, if you understand what I'm trying to say. They were probably a little bit unlucky. They're definitely a better side than what Perth Glory and Brisbane Roar have been. So it's good for them to have been able to break away from those 2 at the bottom. The league is so even, as we keep talking about, then the finals run is still a possibility, but they've got, 10 games remaining. You probably have to win 7 or 8 of them, which is a tough order. So that's what happens when you're down the bottom. You have to win a lot of games if you want to make it. Possible, yes, they're on a good run, but very tough.
Yeah, I've got a feeling that cut-off going to be a little bit higher again this year. I think 34, 35 sort of normally been the number. I think we'll probably be looking, as you say, probably around that 37, more likely 38 at the end of this season, with the expansion of teams and obviously a smaller percentage of the league going through. So, as you say, 7 wins to get them to 39, but it's a big ask in that window. But they started against Brisbane this week, and that's going to be an interesting game to get us set for a very big weekend of football.
Yeah, absolutely. Newcastle, it's very nice. After 2 big wins, they've got the opportunity to play Brisbane at home, which should be another good 3 points. Obviously, the banana peel, storyline is written out for everyone to see, but they should win that game. And then, 2 massive derbies. You've got the Kiwi derby, which obviously just a third of its existence. A little bit less stakes on the line. This one, Wellington have really fallen away since the last time these 2 teams played. So Auckland will go into that game clear favourites. And then the Melbourne derby on Saturday night is massive as well, not just because it is a derby with all the bragging rights and the city lines that we usually like to talk about, but the fact that these teams are 3 and 4 on the ladder and there's only 1 point separating them, and it kind of feels like this is almost like a kind of semi-final, elimination final, or whatever you want to call it, in terms of challenging for that premiership. If you win this game, you then earn the right to, try and chase down Adelaide United, especially for that top 2 spot, which is what these teams at this point in time will really be chasing, right? So a loss here to your direct competitor for that second spot would really hurt. So it's all building up to a very massive game and a very massive weekend.
Certainly is a big weekend, as you say. Those 2 games, obviously, a key sort of look ahead as well for the likes of Sydney as they try and make sure they stay in key pieces. The other one that intrigues me is the one that is bookended by those 2 derbies. It's a massive Saturday of football. Central Coast and Wanderers. I touched on Central Coast. 5 games without loss. They haven't exactly been pretty in a couple of those. The game against the Jets brings to mind where they kind of let that one slip in terms of a share of the points. But again, in that race for the finals, this is a key game for Central Coast to stay alive. They're 4 points adrift. For Wanderers, they can continue to claw their way back over the likes of Macarthur as they catch up that game.
Yeah, and if you pull the Mariners record to the extreme, it's only 1 loss in their last 8 league games, which is kind of crazy. This one, I I don't see them maintaining that streak. You have to consider they're playing away in Japan midweek as well. So to come all the way back for that is going to be a tough ask to conclude their rather miserable Asian Champions League elite campaign. And the wonder is, you never really know what you're going to get, but it's 7 points out of their last 9 available. So the form line is trending positively, and the Mariners, I don't know, when you draw 9 times in a season, are you managing to lose games from winning positions or just hang on to some that you probably should have lost? Probably for the Mariners this season, it's been a bit more of the latter. So maybe this is the case. We know Western Sydney, one of the best teams going forward. They can get in behind better than anyone else in the league in terms of getting in behind the opposition line. When they play high enough, maybe the Mariners won't do that. So you could see maybe the Mariners grinding out another draw, but I think Western Sydney go in as the firm favourites.
It's certainly a different game to the one that played out, I think, just over 4 weeks ago. It'll be 5 weeks by the time we get to match day, where the Mariners did run away 3-1 victors against a very poor, it was probably one of the poorer performances we've seen from Western Sydney in recent weeks. So it's interesting to see. I think both sides have the ability, but I think the travel, as you say, is going to be a bit hard to overcome for Central Coast. So we look forward to seeing how the rest of the round shapes up as well. Western United and Adelaide, another top 6 clash to come to you to wrap up the weekend on Sunday night as well. So a full slate, but 4 games on a Saturday, hard to look past.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting. And we're getting to this point with only kind of 8, 9, 10 games left to go, depending on who you are. And it's kind of exciting that every week we're talking about how close the ladder is, because it means that, especially for those lower final spots, everything is just so competitive. It means that every game means so much more. So really, really exciting.
Certainly does. Lots on the line, as we've said. 11 teams still realistically in with a chance. Perth and Brisbane, we can wish good night to them, but they'll play spoilers for a few teams yet. In terms of other things to look at for the weekend, obviously we've got the dub as well, looking back. And the top 3 here, we talked about it last week. They're really starting to break away. Melbourne City just keep on doing what Melbourne City do. A game in hand, but that goal difference, it's starting to pile up. They've got 5 games to go. They're 7 points clear. Realistically, if you look at a Melbourne victory, if they win all 6 of their games, they'd finish on 48 points. So, I mean, the math says to you, Melbourne City only really need to win 3 of their last 5 and the premiership's theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a team that hasn't lost all season. So they absolutely deserve to be in the position they're in. And that is one where, they're even going into a game in the Women's Asian Champions League, I believe in early March, that fixture is, or late February, in the next few weeks, that quarterfinal of that competition. So they will have to manage that extra game as well. But the good news is that they have such a buffer of points, as you say. And, even you look at Melbourne Victory in second place, they've only lost 2 games all season, yet they're 7 points behind. That feels fairly rough. And that happens because, as we talked about last week, Melbourne City are just a team and a women's football organisation that is set up so well for them to succeed. It really just makes the job pretty easy. So, ticking along very nicely and getting ever closer to that invincible season.
Yeah, well, Melbourne City have done well. They've managed to get that extra game jammed into their sort of January window of football, which is why they've played. So Melbourne City, when they've played that extra game, and they get to play at home in the Asian Champions League, which again means that they at least avoid travel until after their season if they make the semi-finals, because that will be in May. So the quarter on the 23rd of March. So we'll wait and see how that shapes up. But it's an interesting ladder then when you look down past that, because we talked about it, I think, last week or the week before in terms of putting a line through some of these teams, and we're both very comfortable put a line through the bottom 4. Wellington still keeping a little bit of a pulse. Canberra showing some good form. Brisbane, though, we keep talking about how they didn't have any draws. Lachie, they've ruined it for us.
Well, they thought they'd won it, right? They thought they'd keep the streak alive. And it's one of these scenarios where, if you're at the ground, you know exactly what's going on. But if you're watching from home on the telly screen, then the camera angles can be a little bit deceiving. Thought they'd nicked it right at the end and extended that streak. Something like almost 400 days without a draw, which is crazy. But not to be in this one. They end up tying the points, which, to be honest, as much as a win would have done them well, they just need to get some results on the board, right? They've had 3 losses in their last 4 before this. So just to kind of stop the bleeding and get something on the board was very crucial. So, you look at the table, you see Perth, the Wanderers, getting wins, right? But they're kind of already out of it. Every other team pretty much is getting results. So the pace is there and it's being set, and there's only a few rounds left, but you got teams like Canberra who haven't lost in ages, right? Knocking at the heels. So they have to keep it up.
Certainly do. The interesting one, though, we've got the battle for the spoon, and Western Sydney have dragged themselves off the canvas with a comprehensive win over Newcastle. Newcastle winless in 10, and then Sydney, you've got to go back to the 16th of November that they won a game in 90 minutes. I know they've won 2 games this year, but they had that game against Canberra, and you could argue the way they're playing that maybe they would have lost that had the game continued on for the remaining 30-odd minutes in the Storm. And again, I want to go back to the Asian Champions League in the women's. A lot of people were up in arms when the league nominated Melbourne City instead of Sydney. Maybe they knew something that no one else did.
Well, fundamentally, I do agree in sending the premiers to the Asian competition because we don't want someone finishing in 5th and sneaking their way through and then all of a sudden getting to Asian competition. But the downfall of Sydney FC is absolutely remarkable, right? And not in a good way. Just to have such a fall off, to be such a successful football team, everything we're talking about. Melbourne City this season, you could, pick up and slap straight back down on Sydney FC in any of the last 5 years, really. And, Ante Juric still at the helm, seemingly running out of ideas, playing a lot of players in traditionally strange positions. Mackenzie Hawkesby at striker is the one that comes front of mind. He's obviously just having to try something new. He's rolling the dice because what he has been doing isn't working, and he hasn't seemed to have found any solutions yet. And now we're at a point where, they're not going to play finals. They've just got to have a real look at what they're doing behind the scenes and figure out how they want to move forward next season.
They certainly do. It'll be an interesting one. There's some argument that he might be distracted by his other duties as NPL head coach and looking ahead to the Australian Championship as it was revealed just after we recorded last week. But yeah, it's an interesting one. There's Sydney are in all sorts of pain. They weren't the highest scoring team when they went all the way through last year after finishing second and then going on to win the championship. But they got 31 goals in 22 games. At 16 games, they're scoring less than a goal a game. They are 4 goals adrift, if my numbers are right, of the next worst attacking team. When you have a look at teams like Perth and Newcastle, they're noted teams that finish mid-table and below as a regular occurrence, and they're bemoaning a lack of goals from their fans. So you can only imagine how Sydney FC's women's fans feel. The one piece of credit I'll give their fans is they are still turning out in pretty good numbers. As they and Newcastle, they're the bottom 2 teams on the ladder, but they're getting 2 of the healthiest crowds still.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? It's almost at the point where they're so bad that maybe you can just laugh about it. And it's like, wow, this is a horrendously bad season. Like, this is amazing. I've got to watch the car crash. I can't take my eyes away from it, If you're kind of in the mid-pack mediocrity, kind of winning and losing here and there, it's like, oh, don't give us much of a chance. But it's just like something you can't take your eyes off at the moment, to have such a successful club keep on losing every week.
Interesting. I don't know that, I don't love when I'm a mid-table battler and you're kind of on the edge of finals. Will we, won't we? It's just, they've ripped the Band-Aid off, you reckon? And, easy to say when your team's second in the women's and third in the men's at the moment, mate, and you're flying high. But again, it's not that far removed for you to remember when one of your teams at least was really struggling. So my team's always struggling in both of the time. So. A team that doesn't struggle is the Matildas, and we are going into the dub break, and the Matildas will be in action from what will be Friday morning over in the US. The She Believes Cup, a great opportunity again for the Matildas, but they're still kind of in a little bit of no man's land, no woman's land, I should say, hiatus. There's that kind of not quite sure what's going on from a coaching point of view, but they continue on, and again, it'll be great to see them up against some challenging opponents.
Yeah. The kind of coaching situation is interesting. I'm fairly confident. My personal view is that they have someone lined up, but they are contracted until the end of the season, just by the language that's been coming out from James Johnson in press releases and statements and so forth. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. So we're probably looking at another few months until that decision is made, which is, of course, will only be 6, 7 or 8 months away from the Asian Cup, which is kind of the focal point of what we're trying to do here with a new kind of refresh of the Matildas group and the coach. So this tournament would have been perfect for someone new to step in and have a run of 3 competitive games back to back to back. But that's not the case. It will be Thompson Marnie, who I think has done a good job so far in trying to refresh the player list a little bit and introduce some, development in how they play. But there's only so much you can do with an interim coach. And depending on who they bring in. It'll be interesting to see what kind of style they want to play with and whether that was compatible with how the Matildas have been playing for the whatever 12 months it will end up be when Samani was in charge. So definitely an opportunity missed, but if it's in the name of getting the right coach across the line, you still understand it, but yeah, not ideal.
Yeah, we would certainly hope that the case would be that, there's some feedback coming down the line if they've already committed to someone at the end of their contract. Maybe they're already having some off-the-record chats with Tom Samani. Not that anyone would be doing anything outside of their contracts in the football or any other sporting landscape. But as I said, we've got some really good games coming across the next week. 3 top sides, all within the top 21 in the rankings. United States number 1, obviously Japan I think are 8 at the moment, and Colombia just outside the top 20. So some really good challenges for Australia. And again, while they're games that are friendlies by nature, it's an opportunity obviously for these people to demonstrate, the players to demonstrate and continue to put their case forward as we head towards the Asian Cup, as you said. So certainly looking forward to it, and undoubtedly there'll be some in-depth recaps and pull-aparts through the Round Ball Australia crew.
Yeah, absolutely. The Dubcast, I was talking to Paletti actually. We're going to do some on the morning of reactions to all the different games. So yeah, it should be good fun.
Looking forward to it. And as always, Lachie, we appreciate you coming on. And if you want to catch Lachie, Paletti and all the other crew, including Chrisian, who joined us a little bit earlier on, then make sure to head over to Round Ball Australia and all your podcast channels, and you can catch the written content to roundballaustralia.com.au and on YouTube as well. They're absolutely everywhere with all of that. So thanks, Loch.
Doing our best. Cheers, Chris.
Well, it's a big and bumper show, all packed in, and a big thank you to our guest, Chrisian Montegan from the First Serve and Round Ball Australia, coming in to lend his expert knowledge, especially across the tennis landscape, but around the grounds this week. Lachie Avil, Mr. Consistent, comes back with a bang and keeps delivering like he does each and every week for us. He's racking up the appearances, and we appreciate him for it. You can catch Lachie on Round Ball Australia alongside Chrisian and the rest of their crew. And you can find them across most of the podcast platforms and social media channels as well. And Paul Dennett, make sure to tune into his new cricket podcast. It'll be live on Sunday. Dennett on Cricket, the first episode. Get in on the ground floor. It's going to be the absolute home of cricket, and we can't wait to tune in. It's been a huge week, a huge episode, and a big thank you to you all for tuning in. Keep up to date. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe, like the video, hit the bell down the bottom, because that will keep you up to date with when all of our videos are dropping. And, of course, follow us across our social media channels. You can find us on X or Twitter, depending on which era you're coming from. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on TikTok as well. The Chris Mack Show is where to find us. You'll get all of your black and white opinion on sport. No greys here. And until next week, enjoy your week of sport, and we look forward to talking all things the sporting landscape with you again in 7 days.